Hi guys, welcome to a brief summary of an inspector calls. It's going to be very quick. Excuse the gym attire, etc. It'll be quick. It won't be everything you need. Please check my playlist. My playlist has grade 9 examples on your characters and your themes and things like that. Your brief summary then, as requested, is this. You begin an inspector calls with the stage directions. Do not overlook that. We are introduced to Mrs. Berlin. We are introduced to them all. And the stage direction that introduces each character actually foreshadows either who they are or the fact that they're one-dimensional in Mr. and Mrs. Berlin's case and aren't going to change, or for Sheila and Eric that they actually do have potential to change and are conflicted between capitalism and socialism. So check your stage directions. The play opens, remember, with the celebration of the engagement between Sheila and Gerald and the coming together of Crofts Limited and Berlin. And we have this celebration. Mr. Berlin comes across as quite pompous, doesn't he? He gives us the speeches. He gives us the Germans don't want war. He gives us the Titanic is unsinkable. He talks about the labour costs. Mrs. Berlin doesn't have a great deal to say. Eric is drunk, which is key to his character. Sheila is pleased with life, isn't she? Again, Ivany B, and she doesn't really understand who she's marrying. During the celebration, they are interrupted by Edna, the maid, who delivers the news that there's an inspector at the door. The inspector arrives. Massive moment. We get his description. Again, do not overlook the description that he has an impression of massiveness. He looks carefully and weirdly at people when he's talking. And he comes in with the news that a girl has died by drinking disinfectant and has burnt her inside out. Key line. It distresses people like Sheila. Mr. Berlin straight away says, he doesn't know who it is, no recollection. As the questioning begins, what we find out then is that Eva Smith worked for Mr. Berlin in one of his factories. She was fired when they protested for better wages. Again, Mr. Berlin doesn't take responsibility or blame for his actions. It takes Eric to say to him, I would have given her the pay rise, which foreshadows the conflict that they're going to have later on in the play. And Sheila says they're not cheap labour, they're people. So again, you can see that she has this ability to change as the play progresses. The next character who is interrogated by the inspector is Sheila. And what we find out then is after Eva Smith has been fired from Berlin & Co., she goes off to a shop, Millwoods, and she gets a job in this clothing store. Sheila visits the clothing store and is holding up a dress. She catches Eva Smith looking at her, thinks she looks better in the dress, and through jealousy, Sheila then complains and says they're going to close their account. So again, exploitation and manipulation there of the lower classes. So Eva Smith is fired. So we see that she's fired from the Berlin company, then she's fired from the job at Millwards. She changes her name to Daisy Renton. That is the end of Act 1. When the curtain opens for Act 2, what we realise is Gerald knows Daisy Renton and he needs a drink. He wants Sheila to leave the room so she doesn't hear what's gone on. What has happened then is Gerald has had an affair with her over the summer. Funnily enough, the summer that he didn't go near Sheila. We get the impression, and he admits that she had feelings for him, but he didn't really have feelings for her. So basically, this is a sexual affair on Gerald's part. So again, we can see the sexual exploitation now of the lower classes here. He gives her somewhere to stay, he gives her a little bit of money. Obviously, there's some sort of affection on her part, and there's a sexual relationship that goes on. Mrs. Berlin says the affair is disgusting. Sheila is naturally distraught. Gerald leaves the play to go outside because he says he's more upset by this business than he may appear. And then what we get after that is Mrs. Berlin. Mrs. Berlin is then interrogated, and Mrs. Berlin is the head of a women's charity, irony being charity here. And Eva Smith goes to visit her. She's pregnant and she's jobless and she needs the money, but she makes a mistake by calling herself Mrs. Berlin. So Mrs. Berlin, who has a lot of pride, and the reputation of the Berlins is obviously something that they hold quite valuable in terms of social position, refuses her the charity. And we get that line, I used my influence to have it refused. And she stops Eva Smith from getting the charity that she clearly needs. Kind of sends her away. Eric is the last person interrogated. Think about that in terms of structure. Why is it that Eric's left till the end. Is it perhaps because what he's done is worse? Eric needs a drink, obviously. We hear Mrs. Berlin saying the father is responsible, so he should be punished publicly. And then what we find out is that Eric has taken advantage of her. He gives us the line, "I was in a state when a chap easily turns nasty." And we unfortunately assume that he has forced himself onto her physically. Again, sexual exploitation of Eva Smith, a little bit like Gerald. He obviously gets her pregnant. He steals money from Mr. Berlin, £50 from the office, to try and give her. Now the difference here is that she has moral value, does Eva Smith, and she refuses the money because it's stolen. Eric then gets in a lot of trouble with Mr. Berlin for stealing the money. Gerald re-enters the play and brings us the news that it's a hoax. In fact, there's no Inspector Gould. Mr. Berlin confirms this by making a couple of phone calls. He rings the police. He rings the police station and asks about the Inspector Gould. There's not one. He thinks we've been had. It's a joke. He thinks it's funny. They then double check by ringing the infirmary. A girl hasn't been taken in by drinking disinfectant. So again, they make flippant remarks, Mr. and Mrs. Berlin, about, "Oh, we'll all laugh about this tomorrow. It's a bit of a joke. The famous younger generation can't take a joke." Sheila and Eric remain distressed. They are clearly, I think, they have changed in terms of their behaviour, their beliefs, their moral value. Mr. and Mrs. Berlin are very one-dimensional and stay the same. And then we have the finale and the twist that the phone rings, Mr. Berlin answers, and they are going to be visited by an inspector because a girl has died by drinking disinfectant. So you have a cyclical structure in your play. Another key thing before this video ends is that we never change setting in terms of our staging and Inspector Calls, and what that does is it reiterates the bubble that Mr. and Mrs. Berlin live in, that they don't understand the outside world nor the consequences of their own actions. As I say, this was something very quick in terms of a summary. Please check my YouTube channel, my playlist for an Inspector Calls. There's basic analysis for each character. There's also your grade 9 stuff, including full mark responses that I've written myself, and massive good luck in your English literature exam.